Hi, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. This video marks the beginning of a brand new lecture series. I'm looking for the book. There's the book. It's a very heavy book. It's Eschatology, and this is the Oxford Handbook of Eschatology, and it's edited by Jerry L. Walls. You might have a different cover, but what I did is I went to Amazon and I made sure that the content was the same. The content's exactly the same. They have a different cover for it, but as long as it's the Oxford Handbook for Eschatology, edited by Jerry L. Walls, you should be fine. So this is what we're doing. It is a series on eschatology. Eschatology is the study of the end times, and it's primarily a theological study of the end times. And with that, I want to begin right from the bat with a disclaimer. First disclaimer is that I'm not a theologian. I don't have biblical training. My analysis of the concept of eschatology will be, as much as it can be, sort of a layperson's secularist account of the concept. I'm trying to make sense, trying to approach the notion of eschatology as someone who is accessing the information really just from the book. Now, I do have personally more training, more understanding of eschatology, because I incorporated concepts of eschatology in my dissertation on evil. In the end state, I talk about sort of world destruction, world domination, and obviously eschatology sort of factors into that. So the idea of the series, first, is to give an account of eschatological practices within various religious traditions, but I'm not just going to keep it confined to the major religious traditions. With that being said, I present this information without any disrespect or any contempt of religious ideology. The idea is, in order to have a better understanding of what the practice is, let's look at a reference text, the text being this one, being this text, and try to make sense of eschatology in Islamic faith, in Christian faith, in Judaism, in Hinduism. Let's look at various branches of religious traditions and how they interpret the end times. Most of these, if not all of these religious traditions, especially all the ones that I'll be discussing in this series, do have an account, a theological account of the end times. So it's important on that note to sort of cover the religious ideological spectrum, which I will. The second thing to understand is, with respect to the discussion, this is not a discussion just for theological believers. You could be atheist or agnostic and still find the material that I'm going to cover interesting for a variety of reasons. I will talk about pop culture and eschatology. I will talk about the political system and eschatology. The idea is to try and just amass one, as I always do, amass one resource, this resource being the lecture series that I'll be developing, so that you can have information and access to more information on eschatology and eschatological beliefs and practices. Lastly, this has to do with my other lecture series, which is going on at exactly the same time. It's running in concert with this. Is my Nietzsche series. What I'll do is I'll upload videos for eschatology, I'll take a break, I'll upload videos for Nietzsche, take a break, upload videos for eschatology, and go back and forth between eschatology and Nietzsche. My eschatology series will obviously finish before the Nietzsche series. My goal for this series is to have it around a minimum of 8, probably 10 hours, maximum of maybe 12 or so hours. So the series will conclude, unless I still feel that I need to cover more material. I have particular chapters that I've selected in the text that I want to incorporate, and once I finish those chapters, I'll end the series irrespective of where I am with respect to the hour count. Okay, as you guys know, the notes are always available. Just click the link in the description field. Make sure that you click the link each time you come back to this. If you take a break and come back in 2 or 3 days, I may have updated the notes. Also, if you want to get the most recent notification for note updates, you can sign up for my RSS feed on my blog at jasonjcampbell.org, or you can go to my Facebook page and friend me as a friend on Facebook, and it's part of my feed when I update notes. So the notes have been updated, but I'll be adding to these notes frequently. Okay, that's all I have to say. As I said, disclaimer, the presentation of this information on eschatology is done for informational purposes only, and I in no sense intend to offend or demean anyone's religious beliefs. It's a rigorous, hopefully, analysis of the concept of eschatology as it pertains to various religious traditions. So, with that, let's begin. This is Introduction to Eschatology, and this is section 1. Okay. Number 1. I want to begin the discussion on eschatology with something that I think most people are familiar with. I don't want to begin to sort of abstract the concept, right? I don't want to take it too far conceptual, and I'll lose too many of the viewers. What I want to do, as I always do, is sort of begin slowly with concepts that we're more familiar with, and then progressively complicate the information as we go along. Not for the sake of complication, but for the sake of facilitating the discussion, so that the jargon and technical terminology that I'll eventually end up speaking and using, you'll be comfortable with. But I have to introduce you to these ideas. With that being said, I wanted to begin with this notion of fundamentalist or fundamentalism theology, right? So, fundamentalist theology, and we'll take a look at that, right? Fundamentalist theology. This is the actual name of the chapter out of this book, out of the Oxford Handbook of Eschatology, and we're going to be looking at Robert Klaus's text, his chapter contribution to the edited work, and it spans page 263 to 279. So I've given you guys enough notice that the series was beginning, so hopefully you've already gone and purchased your text so that you can follow along. I very much encourage you to get the text on your own so that you can read the text, make an assessment, make interpretations of yourself, then watch the videos and make an assessment of my interpretation, and then have my notes and be able to compile your notes, my notes, your interpretation, my interpretation, your reading. You'll have a much fuller, a much more robust understanding of the text. So the first thing to recognize is, and this is the first bullet point, fundamentalism is both a theological and a historical position, right? When we talk about fundamentalism, in this section, I'm going to talk about the historical sort of relevancy and development progression of fundamentalism, because this is what the author does. Basically what I do is I read the text and then I present the information in the text to make the text more accessible. So the idea of fundamentalism is that fundamentalism is both a historical and a theological position. The author, up until this point in the notes, hasn't talked about the theological position. I have, in previous lectures, talked specifically about the idea of what fundamentalism means, to say that I'm a fundamentalist from a theological position. And there are many different interpretations of this. Again, I'm not a theologian. I don't have biblical training formally, but I've read extensively on the topic. The idea is simple. There are two interpretations when we're talking about fundamentalism from a theological position. Theology. When we're talking about fundamentalism from a theological position, there are two different ways of understanding sort of a theological position, right? The position could be one that says an action is right, so the rightness of an action, right? The rightness of an action is what causes God to command the act, right? So God causes an action to be right. God deems an action right because the action is in and of itself right. The other is to say that an action's rightness, right, the fact that it is right, it is right because God commanded the act to be right, right? So that the act is right because God commands it. Plato famously says, is the act pious because the gods command it, or do the gods command it because the act is pious? And actually, I start off immediately in a pretty conceptually difficult space for an introductory account. This is supposed to be an introduction to eschatology. But the idea, and I'll give the example that I always give. I've done